All right, well, I'm glad you all could make it to a late session. I know everybody's often pretty worn out at this point, so I appreciate you taking the time to join me for an introduction to responsive HTML email. In this session, we're going to be talking about how to use emails to reach subscribers on whatever devices, operating systems, or email clients they may be using. We're only going to be able to talk on the technical end about the kind of most about the challenges of doing HTML email and some of the most basic kind of approaches to it. I hope this gives you a sense of what web skills you have that are going to be immediately transferable, and which web skills you might need to kind of adjust a little bit, and then go on to do more research on your own, because it is a pretty big topic. I'm Thomas Dodson, web developer and designer for the communications team at the Harvard Library. Most of my work is focused on the Harvard Library portal, which is built in Drupal 7, so most of my time is spent in Drupal. But shortly after I started this position, I was a librarian before that, we began offering design and delivery of HTML emails to the Harvard Library community. And since then, we've observed the demand for these services has really taken off. So I thought, that's probably not just true of our organization. It's probably true of lots of people's organizations and clients, so that this might be a useful discussion to have. And it makes sense that the organizations and clients we work with are going to want high-quality responsive emails. You know, there's Facebook, there's Instagram, there's Twitter, there's Tumblr, there's all of this stuff. However, you get a really good return on investment on email contacts. So for every $1 spent on email marketing, I've seen different numbers. I've seen $38, pretty common numbers. Some say as high as $44. So pretty much one of the highest return on investments you can do in terms of marketing to folks. There are 3 times more email accounts than there are Facebook and Twitter accounts combined. So, you know, your target audience, or the people you're trying to reach out to, may not have every social media account, but they're almost certainly going to have an email. When polled, 72% of people prefer to receive promotional content through email, compared to 17% who'd rather get it through social media. So you're probably going to be reaching people on the platform they want to be reached on. 90% of your email gets delivered to the intended recipient's inbox, whereas only 2% of your Facebook fans see your posts in their newsfeed. And I don't think that's going to get any better. It's going to get worse as Facebook and other social media platforms move more and more to a kind of pay-to-play model, where it's the sponsored links that are really the ones that are surfacing. So, and one thing. There's also a higher click rate through email campaigns than through, say, tweets and things like that. And in terms of responsive, from 2010 to 2015, email opens on mobile devices increased by 30%, and that's a trend that, you know, we expect to continue. So there's lots of good reasons to know a little bit about HTML emails, even if you don't sort of want to become an expert at it, which I am not. And there may in fact be people in the room who are, and you should feel free to chime in. So one of the downsides of using email to reach out to clients, a variety of clients and devices and things like that, is frankly that it's really easy to do it badly. So I'd like to show you some examples of some emails I've received while working at the Harvard Library that weren't all that effective. But what they demonstrate is that you've got people who maybe are not even web developers, but who want to reach out to a listserv or reach out to the library community, or the people in the organization, and get them excited about an event or something like that. And it's important enough that they're even willing to kind of try to do it themselves, and that's part of why we're now providing that service. So I generally see kind of 3 categories of attempts at this. One is just I call the word processed email, right? So it's like we've got red text and we've got some bold and we've got a link. There's not really any kind of visual hierarchy. It's not designed, but there's clearly an attempt to make this email stand out. But it really looks an awful lot like every other, of the hundreds of emails that I get. And it's not likely to entice me to go to bagels and coffee with whatever that is. I also, this is one, the one big image email. So in contrast to the previous one, this is quite a nice design, right? Like there's a logo, so it's branded with, and that's helpful. Nice typography, little type embellishments. So why was this not going to work for everybody?
You can't click anything.
Okay, so you can't click anything.
A lot of programs won't show images until you approve it.
Exactly. So yeah, that's one of the major ones. So also, let's say I'm using a screen reader. That's not going to do me any good. So basically, I think one of the major issues is that there are going to be some folks, particularly in like a big organization, where everybody's got their Dell PC with their default Outlook installed. If your organization has decided that the default setting for, let's say, Outlook is not to automatically load images, then the person who receives this is going to see some variation of this instead of your email. So the red X in the top left corner, and they'll know who the email came from, what the subject line is, but that's pretty much it. They'll be like, and I would suggest that the person who is uncomfortable changing a default security setting, or the kind of person who doesn't know how to change this is not going to be comfortable changing it, right? Or if they're very security conscious, they're not necessarily going to say, well, I'll just trust that it'll be okay. So I think the kind of person who gets this email is the kind of person who's not likely to take the next step and reveal the image by right-clicking and saying, show me this image. And the last thing that I've seen is what I call a collage email. So I get this and I'm like, oh, okay, so there's an event and there's a couple of illustration images that go with it. That's pretty cool. Actually, this was pointed out to a coworker pointed this out to me, and she said, well, I went over to highlight the text and discovered that it was an image. That block of text is also an image. So if I want to copy the text of that and drop it into my calendar, I can't do it. And I might be really surprised when it starts dragging all over the screen and stuff like that. And then, this, here's what it looks like on a phone. The layout has completely collapsed, such as it is. And I think we're just lucky that on the top level, the text covered the illustration rather than the other way around, or we wouldn't even know this was advertising an event. Or the first event, we wouldn't know if the illustration was on top. So basically just to say, this is not easy. There's lots of ways to do it wrong, but clearly, I think even folks who are, maybe don't have a lot of coding skills want this. They want to do it. So if we're gonna advise them about how to do it, we're gonna wanna know a little bit about what the limitations of HTML email are and how to address them. So, but the first thing I think just to kind of be responsible as we advise our organizations and clients who are thinking about doing this and sending out these messages is we need to know a little bit about the rules of the road for email. And even though it's not the most, I've only got one slide devoted to it, it's not the most kind of exciting technical topic, but it does influence what you're actually going to put in your email. So for example, do you have an unsubscribe link in your email? You'll discover that's actually more or less required by law. So, so here are the basic guidelines set out in the CAN-SPAM Act, which is the main act that governs the sending of commercial emails. It was signed in 2003 by George W. Bush, and it's Controlling the Assault of Non-Solicited Pornography and Marketing Act. And that sounds like it maybe just applies to bulk email, but in fact it doesn't. It applies to any email message which is a commercial advertisement or the promotion of a commercial product or service. So that includes any email that promotes content on a commercial website. So if you're going to be using this in any kind of marketing efforts for an organization or a client that sells things, you're going to have to follow these rules of the road. And it's worth noting that each separate violation of the Can-Spam Act, each email that violates it, is at least theoretically subject to penalties of up to $16,000. So you don't want to, expose your client to that kind of liability if they've got a list of 900 people and you kind of blatantly don't follow these rules. That's 900 times. It's not per campaign; it's per email. I don't know much about the enforcement of it, but it can get the cost can get pretty high. I also have to point out that I'm not an attorney, and these tips do not constitute legal advice. So here are the guidelines. You have to have affirmative consent from anyone you're sending marketing emails to. There's different ways to get that. The user can say, please send me things. You can say, I want to send things to you, and they can say yes. Some things you can't do, you can't share email addresses with third parties without the user's clear consent. So you can't say, share one client's list with it, use it on a campaign for another client because you think, hey, they're in the same industry. They might want to reach out to these same customers. You can't do that without the consent of everybody on the list. You can't collect emails from discussion forums, blog comments, and then just start sending to people. That's not enough to constitute affirmative consent. It has to be easy to opt out of. And what do we mean by easy? The general standard is 1 or 2 clicks. So there's an unsubscribe link in your email, and click on it. I get to a page which allows me to click on something else to unsubscribe. That's ideal. And one thing, a surefire way to get yourself reported and blacklisted, if not necessarily prosecuted, I don't know about that, is to try to we're all clever. Many of us are clever CSS people. Like, I'll just make the unsubscribe link the same color as the background. Like, very clever, but no, you're not supposed to do that. Or I'll make the unsubscribe link like 0.001 EM. Or like, no, you can't do that either. You have to be on the up and up and get people a way to unsubscribe. And so other things that presumably people have tried to do, which you can't do, if someone asks you to stop sending them stuff, you have to respond to that request within 10 days. And you can't charge a fee for it, so which makes sense. And the unsubscribe option must be available 30 days after the email is sent. So you can't say, hey, they have the person say, hey, I want to subscribe, follow the unsubscribe link, but if they wait 2 days, you've taken that page down. You can't do that. Okay, you need to have a valid email return address. You can't send from a false address. It's okay to make it seems like, here is a message from the CEO of our company, but the actual email goes to communicationsteam@company.com. That's okay. It's a real email address for someone at the other end of it. You can't just, gobbledygook at falsething.com. This is something I was surprised by. You have to provide a physical address. At least that's what the Act says. And I've seen, and maybe someone in this room might even know, it's not clear. I've seen some folks say it can be a P.O. box, and some other folks say it cannot be a P.O. box. I would, not an attorney, I couldn't really tell you. But you're supposed to provide a physical address. And then the rest of it, I think, is, kind of common sense. Don't disguise an advertisement as if it were a personal email. You can certainly be friendly. You can have, many of these mail programs allow you to say, hello, so-and-so. You can do that, but you can't just present it as if it's a personal email. And you can't offer a reward for forwarding it. And that you can't send it to somebody and say, we'll give you either money, coupons, discounts, or awards for forwarding this email to someone else. So as long as you sort of, yes?
7 years, good luck.
I can't recommend that. Yeah. Or maybe that's the fee for unsubscribing. You'll get 7 years of bad luck. That's what
First one, affirmative consent.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a double opt-in or just a single?
It's my understanding that that double opt-in is preferred, but that's not necessarily that. I don't think the Act itself defines affirmative consent in that way. I see somebody nodding their head who just gave a talk on privacy, I think. So yeah, the things that I've looked at recommend being as sort of as a best practice as opposed to a requirement.
What's double opt-in?
So someone could just sign someone else up for a newsletter, and then let's say it was you, I signed you up. You would get emails from companies and you never signed up for it. So a double opt-in would be the company would send you an email saying, are you sure you want to sign up for this?
And I think it's a good idea. So like one of the, I run a small literary magazine, and I sent a thing out. I sent a thing out to a bunch of folks who were on our list and said, hey, do you want to start getting a newsletter from us? And then the people who said yes stayed on the list, and the people who did not respond came off the list. And that's, I think, ideal. Okay, so okay.
Sorry, the physical address, is that has to be in the message itself, or is it can be like via a link?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. Okay.
I'm not sure either, but I know that service such as MailChimp forces you to put a physical address. And that is usually related to the way that the entity is registered, as a business or as a corporation. That in Massachusetts, for example, you have to have a physical address even if you're only doing business through a post office box.
That makes sense. Yeah, I know that I have not used MailChimp, and I usually use Campaign Monitor, and I know they definitely will not let you upload a template that doesn't have using their templating language that does not have an unsubscribe link. So some of the emailing services try to prevent you from making missteps like that. But yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know more about the details. So I think most of kind of what I want to share with you guys has to do with the challenges, the kind of technical challenges of doing HTML email. Why is this so hard? Or tedious might be a better word. The key challenge is really, I think, dealing now with the diversity of platforms on which people are reading their email. So the same user may read email at different times in different email clients, Outlook or Apple Mail, different devices, a Dell PC, an iPhone 5. I check my work email on this computer that's at my desk, but then I have my iPhone next to me. And if I'm going to a meeting, I might switch to that and read it in a different client on a different device. And then you add in users who access email services by means of a website. I can access my work email through Outlook web client or Gmail or whatever that is. I'm going to use a browser for that. And different browsers are going to behave differently. So we've really kind of got all of this stuff going on at the same time. And you need a single email that effectively reaches all these users as much as possible on all of the platforms on which they read emails. And just to give you an example of how different and sort of surprising it can be, so also operating system. So for example, the Outlook mail client on the Mac uses a rendering engine that's very similar to, or that's the same engine used to render websites. I forget which one, but on the PC, it uses the same rendering engine as Word. And I'll mention that more. So, it's kind of unpredictable. Okay, so here's some of the issues you're going to face as, I've kind of thought about this as, you already know how to make websites probably, and you're ready to maybe start making HTML emails for the first time. What kind of stuff would I wish someone would tell me? So there's no support for the script tag in your HTML document that you're sending as an email. So that means no JavaScript. And although it feels kind of silly to mention it in 2015, no Flash either. But I think that the reason why we mention it is that if you're like, oh, I want animations, and so I plan to use JavaScript for that, maybe I'll use Flash. You can't use Flash either. So as a result, so that's just out the window. I'll get back to the script in a minute. Images in emails have to be hosted. You can't just have a zipped folder of images and send it with your email. That's not going to work. Or sort of direct it to some subfolder, things like that, or your 50 attachments. You need to have a stable server where those images are going to live, and you link off to them the way you would link off to an image on the web in your source. there's no support for the link tag, and this is the thing that I think ends up really causing all of us a lot of trouble, because we're modern web design. What you want is your HTML, which is your structure and your semantics, and you want your CSS, which is your presentation and styling, and you want JavaScript for behavior, and generally you want those things in different files. That's the way at least I'm accustomed to working. Here, if the link tag is not supported, you can't. That's how you would link to an external CSS style sheet. So that's going to be a big problem and a big difference from making kind of traditional websites. There's also in Gmail no support for the style tag. The Gmail actually strips out the entire head of an HTML document that's sent as an email. So since the style element is what allows us to create internal style sheets, we can't do that in emails that we're sending that we expect to be open in Gmail, or we have to accommodate that fact. So the result of all of this is that most of the styling done for HTML emails is done inline, which I'll talk about more in a moment. But I think most of us, that's like 2 steps away from the way we like to work. There's also limited CSS properties. Most CSS3 is going to behave kind of unpredictably in different, email browsers, whatever, that when looking at an HTML email. And one of the things that I really am sad about is the float property doesn't work. At least I think it's in Outlook that it doesn't work. And basically it's not reliable enough to use for layouts. And I feel like most of the layouts we're accustomed to doing that have like multiple columns or text going around images in attractive ways, all are using that float property in some way. And so we just can't rely on it. So the reason for that is largely that in 2007, Microsoft chose to change Outlook's HTML rendering engine from one that was based in Internet Explorer 6 to one that was based on Word. And it stuck with that for subsequent releases, at least for PCs. So the result is really quirky rendering of CSS, and Outlook and web desktop, both web clients and desktop clients of Outlook do not support floating elements. So here's a quote that I think exactly 0 email coders will agree with. We've made the decision to continue to use Word for creating email messages because we believe it's the best email authoring experience around. I don't think anyone agrees with that, but that's what they said. So there are also some things that are not sort of universally supported or might behave in a variety of unexpected ways. Like, might just be something small like extra padding, or it might be something more significant like not recognizing the tag at all. So like section, article, div, the p tag, the good old p tag. Sometimes you can't entirely predict across platforms how styling it's going to behave. The padding might not, in particular padding. One thing I don't think I put on this slide, but you'll want to, when you're making HTML emails, before you kind of before it's like production ready, you're going to want to strip out all your comments. That can cause email clients to trip up when they encounter comments. Call span and row span for tables, which if you're, some of you probably are anticipating why I'm talking about tables, even though you don't intend to necessarily send out, big bunches of tabular data and emails, but it will matter to know that you can't have a single table cell and use the call span or row span attributes to have it fill up an entire column or an entire row. Assigning multiple classes to the same HTML element, no, I'm sorry, that's likely to cause problems too. You're going to want to avoid complex CSS selectors and CSS layout properties generally. So like position absolute, yeah, you don't want to use that with an HTML email. It's not going to behave consistently. Complex CSS selectors like this, anytime you start breaking out the caret, like this is a descendant of this selector, and only in those cases apply this style. You want to avoid that. You can't even use shorthand for things like color and font size. So let me show you an example of something that you would not want to write. So here, sorry, to the very bottom of the slide, you've got a p tag with 3 000 for black. I'm using only 3 instead of all 6 for the hexadecimal. Don't do that in HTML email. You can't predict exactly how it's going to behave. So no shorthand.
Could you write out black?
I don't know. That's a very good question. I don't know. Does anybody know the answer to that question? Can you write out something like black? Yeah, one of the supported supported colors. I don't know. That would be worth looking into. Here we have a complex font declaration where we're saying, I want this to be 12 pixels, 16 pixels of line height, Helvetica, sans serif is the font family. You want to avoid that too. You actually have to go font family, whatever it is, line height, whatever. You have to declare them separately. This is likely to freak out the renderer as well. So how are we going to address all of these limitations? I think that the general consensus has been that we're just going to have to, we're going to have to go back to the future. We're going to have to code like it's 1999. And that's actually not an exaggeration. That's pretty like 98, 99. Like that's about where we're going to be living when we're coding for HTML email. So let's see. So as I mentioned before, and as we all know, we've moved to a paradigm where we want to separate the structure and the semantics, keep it in the HTML file and have all the presentation live somewhere else. Since we can't do that and we can't reliably use floats in Outlook, we're going to go back to the bad old days of using tables, which are really just for displaying tabular data for layout and structure, or for layout anyway. So positioning things on the page, if any of you have got those skills from, have been doing this, since the 90s, you can dust those skills off. They're relevant again. As I mentioned, we're going to be using simple, mostly inline CSS. And here's another thing that's a blast from the past. If you've got HTML attributes like border, align, width, in general, I think most of us prefer to use the CSS, to set those sort of things. But the general rule of thumb is if you've got an HTML attribute, prefer it over a CSS style declaration for things like that, width, border, cell padding, all that kind of stuff. It's just going to be more reliable. So I thought we'd just do the very kind of basics of like, what would the skeleton of one of these things look like? And it's kind of even barely the skeleton because we don't have too much time. So one of the first things you might ask in preparing a document like this is, well, what should the doc type be? So you've got some choices. You could have no doc type. That's going to cause some problems in some clients. You could try HTML5, going to cause problems in some clients. HTML4 transitional. I think there's like one small padding issue that is consistently happens in Outlook with that. And so I've this link, when you go, if you want to go to the slides later, that link will take you to a discussion of what the different doc type declarations for HTML email might be. And it basically, the short answer is use XHTML 1.0 transitional. That's the kind of, and if you look at like campaign monitors templates or Zerb's templates or folks who are doing this, regularly, that's the doc type declaration that they're using. Whoops. So essentially, that's what it looks like. And if you're not familiar with XHTML, I would describe it as it's HTML built out of XML, but it's the same old HTML you know and love, but it's just a little bit stricter. Which, given, I think is another good idea to use it is if you're running your stuff through validators. Since the email clients are going to be so finicky, you probably want to hold a little bit stricter than you might be. You don't want to have the email client try to figure out what you meant, right? Like you want it to be very explicit. So the main thing is like, you have to close all your tags, right? Like it won't, you don't want, that's in my experience writing XHTML. It's not, it's also the same format used for ebooks. A similar thing. You've got all these different devices rendering it. You want it to validate and be very specific. So the next thing you're going to put in your document in the head tag is this thing that if you do responsive design, you're probably already very familiar with. It's called the responsive meta tag, or other people call it the viewport meta tag. And basically, it's this declaration that says, well, so as you know, mobile devices most of them are set up in such a way to say they're going to assume that what they're looking at on a website is not designed for them. That is actually it's presumed that it's designed. They're going to presume it's designed for a desktop, something like 980 pixels wide, say, and they're going to zoom out until that site fits in the narrower dimensions of the viewport provided by the device. This declaration, width equals device width, initial scale 1, that says don't do that. Don't zoom out. Don't assume that this is like a desktop. I've actually have the intention of styling this in a way that's designed to fit in your screen or to fit differently. So that's a standard thing in most responsive websites are going to have anyway. But you'll use it here as well. And then, because you can't rely on the body tag even to behave well, I think some even strip the body tag. In fact, I'm sure some of the clients strip the body tag. You're going to basically create a pseudo body. And what that pseudo body is this outer table in which you declare it width 100%. You turn the border off. You turn the cell spacing off, cell padding. You can give it. You probably want to give it a background color, which will be like this background color, like for the whole page. You can declare that background color in the body tag, but you'll want to also declare it here because, again, the body tag might be stripped or might not be reliable. But basically, I've just got a table, right? And then in that, I'm going to put inner tables. And then those inner tables are where I'm going to do things like declare the actual width, the kind of fixed width of this thing in this design. So, for example, here I chose width 600, and notice that I'm using the HTML, not CSS, to declare that width. Just more reliable. And I happen to choose 600 in this case because many email clients, feature a preview window, and the range for the, without actually opening the email, and that preview window tends to be about 600 to 800 pixels wide. And so, 600 is just, sort of conservative choice to make sure that it's going to fit in those sort of tiny windows. And like I said, I'm not covering everything, but I want to cover just kind of the broad topic of styling text. So this is my inner table. And so this whole thing is just going to be tables within tables, tables nested within tables. That's how you're going to do your layout positioning. And here, notice that I'm using a tag I've never used anymore, the B tag. Make this bold. Yeah, we don't use that anymore, but we use, the strong tag or whatever, and then we decide what, that might actually mean all caps and green, or but here, let's say if I wanted this text to be bold, and I just know the B tag is going to work. If all I want is the text to be bold, I'm just going to use the B tag. Now for everything else, because the P tag can display some weird padding in different clients and stuff, your styling for most things generally either won't include P tags, except for like body text, but at the very least, you're not going to style the P tag. You're going to style in general the table cell. So here I'm giving it a class of content. I'll explain why in a minute. But here I'm just putting the CSS styling as a style tag, giving it a color. Notice I'm using all of the numbers. Font family, declaring that, and then separately declaring the font size, separately declaring the line height, and closing it out. So that's how you're going to end up styling a lot of your text, is doing it at this level. And obviously it's going to be tedious because you're going to be doing this over and over and over again. Like, okay, which is why we don't like writing inline CSS, right? Like so here's the next table cell that's styled just like the one before it, time to rewrite all that CSS, right? So that's kind of nutty, but that's commonly what's going to happen. So folks who are used to responsive design, your obvious question is going to be, well, where media queries fit into this? Isn't that how we detect the width of a screen and respond to it at all? So there's still this issue with Google taking out the style tags, but other combinations of devices and browsers and whatnot, like your iPhone with Apple Mail or whatever, or most Android mail applications, are going to not do that. They're going to respect the style tags. So just like you would with an inline style, full inline style sheet, you can have media queries here in the style tag. Just know that they're not going to be respected by Google Mail. And that includes Google Mail on a phone, because it's just the same thing wrapped in their mobile wrapper. So here, for example, it might be something I might do. It's like, okay, once the screen is larger, the width of the viewport is larger than, say, 510, restyle td.content. That's why I gave it a class, knowing I was going to do this. And I'm going to say make the font size a little bigger, make the line height a little bigger. And then notice I'm having to tag it with important, which is, again, it's sort of generally not a good CSS best practice, but I'm having to cancel out the inline style. So I'm probably going to need to do that to make sure that this sticks. So I have some good news. So I apologize that I can't get into more in depth about all the different kind of like shifting layout techniques and things like that. I just think we would get bogged down in code, and I just want to kind of give you the lay of the land. There's lots of great tools to learn how to do this. One of the things, though, that I find invaluable is these CSS inliners, so also sometimes called CSS injectors. And what they do is allow you to write an internal style sheet, or in some cases, let's stop there. It allows you to write an internal style sheet in the HTML document, upload it, and then it's going to take all of that CSS. It's going to match up this class that you wrote, this class that you styled with all the elements of that class or whatever, and it's going to inline it all for you. Some people might not be comfortable with that. Those people can spend hours and hours inlining their CSS. Good for them. I'm comfortable with it. It's been working pretty consistently well for the kinds of stuff I need to do. So you can just go there, and they're free. The Zerb inliner and the pre-mailer. And then you're almost certainly going to want to have some sort of distribution service for your emails, even if you don't use their templates, because essentially your personal email server is probably not sort of like zoned for sending out bulk emails anyway, right? These companies like Campaign Monitor, MailChimp have specialized servers that it's not going to raise any red flags for them to send out a bunch of bulk emails. But lots of other reasons to use them. But one of them is, I use Campaign Monitor. MailChimp has this too. Is, again, you can say, here is my HTML email file, inline all my CSS, and here is a zipped folder of all of my images. I want you to host those for me too. And so it saves so much time. They also have, I've listed here links to a couple of templates where you don't have to be a part of the service to get them. Zerb has a responsive email, the folks who make Foundation. They've got some email templates, and they're actually, if you're just doing something fairly simple, it's kind of nice to just be able to be like, yeah, I want a thing with a sidebar, or even just for learning, like, how did they do that? I want a simple newsletter with these kind of elements. So that can be a really good place to start, I think. Campaign Monitor has a drag and drop interface and they're kind of, I think, part of, I've mentioned them a couple times. I use them because they make available a lot of tutorials and documentation and stuff, and I feel like they give a lot back, and that's part of why I like using them. And they're one of the industry leaders, but they've got a template builder that does not require you to have an account with them. You just you build a kind of drag and drop using one of their kind of more basic templates, including I think you can do the editable stuff there too. And then you just have them email it to you. It's not the most obvious link in the box. Like, I don't want your Campaign Monitor server. What I want is you to just email me the template I just built. But it is there, and that can be useful. Because, this stuff changes too. Maybe you don't want to be the person who's like an expert about how to code these. I don't necessarily have time to be that person, right? In my organization, my main responsibilities are in Drupal, but I want to be able to build these things and have some confidence that they're going to turn out okay. So working within an established template is a way to do that. One thing that I asked a colleague who does this too, to look over the presentation and give me any notes, and one of his notes was make sure to tell them that with these inliners, if you're using a campaign monitor template as a starting point, and then you're like, oh, but I really like that template, and then I'm going to upload it and inline all the CSS using MailChimp. You don't want to necessarily do that, right? Like you probably want to stick with, if you're using campaign monitor template, let their inliner take care of it. Don't necessarily take it over some other inliner. It might not match up precisely. And then there are a couple of their paid services, but the kind of standard ones I'm aware of are Litmus and Email on Acid, which will allow you to you give them your HTML email and say, show this to me in like these myriad combinations of browser device, presumably they're emulators, right? Like, and then they'll just show you, and you can be like, oh, on Android using this mail application, this thing is broken. And then you can focus your attention there. You're not sort of in the dark, and you don't have to own, every device there is. I thought I would, so there's about 10 minutes left. I thought I would just open it up to questions. If you want the slides, they're at technablog.com/nerdsummit. And thank you all very much.
Two observations on problems that I've had recently. One is generating an RSS-driven email campaign, where it turns out that there's some CSS styling going on at the source level, and then so some class doesn't get declared, and the picture's going to help. That's something just to watch out for. The second thing is I was doing an email campaign for an organization, and the president wanders in and says, "Gee, this looks weird on my watch."
Oh no! We tend to have the other problem of this looks weird in Internet Explorer 6. Yeah. Like yes, it does.
And it turns out that everything you describe, Apple Watch throws on the floor. They just use plain text.
Yeah, I'm really hoping it disappears. I can't. That's just that would just send me home weeping to think about trying to make stuff for Apple. Go ahead.
I don't know if you know, is there any reason they let it fall so far behind? I feel like now I have to go back and learn how to code like we were doing.
I know, yeah. I don't, other than, like the word rendering in Outlook to me just seems bizarre, that part. The rest of it is it's not in every case that it's fallen behind so much as we have to use old techniques because like some of them support more than others, right? And so we just have to use the lowest common denominator code that we can use. So it's not that, I guess I would say that they don't share the burden. Email clients and webmail clients and stuff don't share the burden equally of having screwed us over, right? I would say Outlook is a big culprit, and sadly Gmail too, because we preventing us from using internal style sheets most of the time. Go for it, yeah.
So first of all, why not just use plain text all the time? And when you sell, why not? To follow up, the option where you send both, and the client is supposed to choose. So maybe Apple Watch will choose correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Is that possible?
That makes sense. The tool that I use and other people do, I assume it works the same way. It prepares both your HTML email and a text email, and I don't actually know. Kathy, do you know one of the colleague of mine? Do you know? Do you happen to know if it picks one or the other?
I don't know what campaign monitor was. We were using Silverpop.
Right.
I think somebody had to tell it that it wanted the text.
Is that
There's some
okay?
response that it had to
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually didn't know that.
I'm not sure. From the client.
Okay, that makes sense. And then your other
I can do that on my hands.
Yeah.
They want to does it.
yeah, I think your other issue was why would you ever send something other than a text email? Because they're, I don't know. I mean, well, I do know I mean, like, I think the main thing is you want your branding. You know, if you're an organization or a brand, you want your branding to the forefront, and that's part of why, you know, the appeal of an email as opposed to, say, Facebook, which has got their branding all over it, right? And then also, you want it to stand out from the hundreds of emails that people get every day. And, you know, why do we design things? You know, I think is the but I think it's a fair point of, you know, I have another colleague who's like, this is not what email is for. Like, basically his just position, and he's like a really, you know, he codes in all these different languages. He's just like, yeah, that's not what email is for. Like, it's not designed to do that. So of course it's hard, you know. I mean, I understand that position, but yeah.
I just want you to speak a little bit to defining text sizes in pixels versus percentages or versus ems.
Yeah. I'm kind of agnostic on that. I mean, I tend to do it in pixels, but I don't know that may just be a bad habit that I have. I don't do it for any particular reason. Do you have some thoughts on that?
Just in terms of, you know, like some of, you know, like it's like more absolute, and that gets cause like issues when you're getting into other, you know, if you're solely looking at to be responsive, then it's like, you know, here's your 12 pixels and here's your 12 pixels.
Right.
Your screen's this big, your screen's that big, so like you run into.
Yeah, I mean, I know that I mean, I tend to, I haven't really done it with emails. I've used M's and REMs in my responsive sites, but I haven't actually. I think it would be worth looking at the code being used by like MailChimp and Campaign Monitor in their templates. What are they doing? It's like, and that's generally kind of how I've been guided in most of this stuff, is like, what are they doing? This is like their whole business. And so I would take a look and see what they're doing. And yeah, email me or send me a tweet or something. Tell me what you find.
I use MailChimp. I don't code. I mean, it's got like the drag and drop thing, and I run a little small company that it's nice because it's got all the branding, and I can just change, you know, the content, but I can add videos and photos, and then it does have an area where it'll save it as HTML, you know, but I think it's a great service. I mean, I don't find it that hard. It's not like I have to do the coding.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I think, and when I talk about it as being a difficult thing or a tedious thing, I think I'm really talking about it in terms of coding it yourself, building your own template, right?
I can go in and change the code if I want.
Yeah.
It's easy. But
Yeah.
to get set up,
And honestly, I mean, I think that's where most folks are gonna land. It's just it's like, so for example, I don't do ebooks anymore, and part of the reason I don't do them anymore is that it's not really super cost effective for me to do them. It's like, need to know all the same stuff I need to know to do a website, plus some other stuff, and it takes, to do it well, takes a long time, and clients don't want to pay for it because they're like, we gave you the book, just make the ebook. Like, I don't know anybody who wants to pay what it's actually, the time that it takes to actually do an ebook. And I feel like some designers have come down, based on sort of what I hear from conferences and stuff, that a lot of people feel that way about HTML email too. It may not be worth the investment to be good enough at it to feel confident that you're not gonna have any gotchas. So in general, I mean, I think what my goal here is to say, this is, I think, you know, if you didn't know anything about HTML email before, my hope is that this is enough for you to, when you tell your organization, like, you should go with Campaign Monitor or MailChimp or this freelancer or whatever, that you know enough to make some judgments, right? You know, like, you could look at the templates by Campaign Monitor and MailChimp and things like that and be like, or some other cake or whatever, and say like, does this make sense to me? that they're doing that, you'll see some red flags like, or does this freelancer know what they're doing really?
I utilized Dreamweaver in a previous job,
Mhm.
and I was able to lay it out and design, do all the work there, what you see, what you get
Mhm.
style. And then Silverpop was the email client. So we were able to then take that HTML and just upload it and send the files, and we were good to, with the images, and we were good to go. And so that saved all that hand coding and all of that additional CSS.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that any of those sort of programs that are writing the code for you, there's always more than, I guess the concern I would express about that is that there's always more than one way to do something. And the way Dreamweaver might choose to do a thing might not be to use like the HTML element for the width, let's say. It might choose to use CSS or whatever, right? You know what I mean? Like if you're not actually kind of handling the code yourself, it may not be following it. I would be surprised, in fact, if Dreamweaver followed the kind of standards we've been talking about related to HTML email, because it doesn't make sense in other contexts, right? To use tables for layout or things like that, right? So I would be a little concerned about that. But I guess it wouldn't, it wouldn't necessarily be a problem to, if you had somebody who's knowledgeable about the code, to use it as like I think a tool for kind of doing mock-ups, essentially, and then somebody could go in and look at the code. But somebody who's going to go in and look at the code is probably going to want to write it themselves anyway. But
it was just like over, one page
Yeah.
file, and there was
when was this?
API and JavaScript that attached and spoke to the database that allowed us to track recipients that were.
Yeah, no, you can definitely do all that kind of tracking. We had a different experience with Silverpop. I was so glad to move away from it personally because we would code things and we would put it in, and a bunch of span tags would be added to it kind of arbitrarily and things like that. It kept trying to outsmart us. Like, no, you don't really know how to code. Let's override your code. And I'm glad to hear that you didn't have that problem, but that was a kind of constant problem for us. All right. Well, thanks everybody.
Make sure you turn your YouTube thing on.
I just did. Thank you.
All right, so I was supposed to be the.
No, that's good. That's good.